The moment Tara Flynn told the man to leave, she had no idea she was talking to the person whose signature was on her paycheck. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the sky couldn't decide between gray and darker gray, and the Harlow and Reid flagship store on Michigan Avenue was 40 minutes from opening. Tara had come in early to reorganize the cashmere display, her third time that week, because the overnight team kept folding things wrong, and she was halfway through a stack of charcoal turtlenecks when she heard the front door chime. She turned around, and her first thought was, wrong building. The man standing just inside the entrance looked like he'd walked in off the lakefront trail. He was tall, with dark eyes and the kind of face that might have been handsome if it weren't so tired-looking, wearing a faded olive jacket over a plain gray shirt, jeans with an actual frayed hem, and running shoes that had clearly been used for running. No bag, no watch she could see. His hair was a little long in the back, like he'd missed an appointment somewhere. Tara set down the turtleneck she was holding. "We're not open yet," she said. Not unkind, exactly, just clear. The man looked around the store slowly, the way people do when they're not reading a room so much as remembering it. His eyes moved over the marble floors, the brass fixtures, the wall of backlit shelving where the new fall collection sat in neat, expensive rows. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to look around." Tara pressed her lips together. She'd worked at Harlow and Reid for 3 years, and she knew what just wanted to look around usually meant. It meant someone had pushed open the door without checking the hours, liked what they saw, and assumed that liking something was enough to make it available to them. "We open at 10, she said. "There's a coffee place 2 doors down if you want to wait." He didn't move. "I won't be long," he said. Something about the way he said it, not rude, not apologetic, just completely unbothered, made a small irritation flicker behind Tara's sternum. She had a display to finish and a regional manager coming in at 11, and she did not have time for a man in worn-out sneakers who seemed to think the rules applied to everyone but him. She walked toward him. Not fast, but with intention. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside until we open. Store policy." He looked at her then, really looked at her, with those dark eyes that were harder to read than she expected. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Store policy," he repeated, as if he were making a note of it. "Yes," Tara said. "If you come back at 10, one of our associates will be happy to help you." He nodded once, slowly, and turned and walked back out through the door. It closed behind him with the same soft chime. Tara went back to her turtlenecks. She had completely forgotten about him by the time the store opened. The regional manager, a brisk woman named Donna, who wore the same red blazer to every visit, arrived at 10:50 and spent 40 minutes going through sales figures and telling Tara that the visual merchandising in the accessories section lacked intentionality. Tara nodded in the right places and kept her expression neutral, which was a skill she had spent years developing. It was almost noon when the store got its first real rush of the day, and Tara was helping a woman choose between 2 coats when she heard her colleague Britt make a small, strange sound from across the floor. Tara looked up. The man in the olive jacket was back. He was standing near the entrance again, this time with a younger guy in a suit. Early 30s, hair, gelled with visible effort, who was holding a leather portfolio and looking around with the quiet alertness of someone who was paid to pay attention. Tara's customer said something about the charcoal versus the camel, and Tara answered on autopilot, because most of her attention had just shifted involuntarily across the room. The man in the olive jacket wasn't browsing. He was standing in the center of the floor, looking up at the ceiling, then down at the floors, then at the wall displays. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was doing that thing again, that slow, deliberate taking stock of the space. The suited man beside him opened the portfolio and said something. The man in the olive jacket shook his head slightly, said something back, and pointed at the far wall, the one where the new installation had gone up 2 weeks ago, a grid of framed photographs that the creative team had spent a month designing. Britt appeared at Tara's elbow. "Do you know who that is?" Britt said, in a voice so low it was practically a lip movement. "No," Tara said. "Why?" Britt looked at her with an expression that suggested Tara had just said she'd never heard of weather. "That's Colton Reid," Britt said. The name didn't land immediately, then it did. Tara's customer was saying something about sleeves. Colton Reid, as in Reid Capital, as in the investment firm that had acquired Harlow and Reid 14 months ago. As in the reason the company was still solvent, the reason they'd kept all 3 flagship locations instead of closing 2, the reason Tara still had a job that she was currently doing while staring across the store at the man she had told to go get a coffee and come back at 10. "You're sure?" Tara said. It wasn't really a question. "I Googled him," Britt said. "I'm sure." Tara's customer held up the camel coat. "I think this one," she said. "What do you think?" "Beautiful choice," Tara said, and she meant it about 0%, because her entire nervous system was currently occupied with something else. She rang up the coat. She folded it in tissue. She tucked it into the signature Harlow & Reid bag with the black ribbon handles, and she thanked her customer by name because she always did that, always, because she was good at her job. And then she smoothed the front of her blazer and walked across the store. She had no idea what she was going to say. She knew she was going to say something, because the alternative was standing behind the register for the rest of the day, waiting for the floor to absorb her. And Tara Flynn had never in 31 years waited for a floor to absorb her. That wasn't how she was built. Colton Reid was crouched down near the base of the back wall, looking at something near the baseboard. A scuff, maybe, or a seam where the paneling met the floor. The suited man was typing something into his phone. "Mr. Reid," Tara said. He stood up. He was taller than she'd registered this morning. "I owe you an apology," she said before he could speak. "I asked you to leave this morning, and I didn't know who you were, but I want to be honest. I don't think that's actually the point. I should treat everyone the same way regardless of who they are, and I didn't, so I'm sorry." There was a pause. The suited man had stopped typing. Colton Reid looked at her with that same unreadable expression from this morning, and Tara held her ground and waited because she had said what she needed to say, and she was not going to fill the silence with more talking just to make herself feel better. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tara Flynn. I'm one of the senior sales associates. How long have you been with the company?" 3 years. He nodded. He looked at her for another moment with those dark, considering eyes. "I appreciate the apology," he said. "The part about it not being the point, that's the right instinct." Tara blinked. That was not the response she had prepared for. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." He gestured at the wall of photographs behind her. "When did that installation go up?" She turned. 2 weeks ago. The creative team designed it. It's part of the fall campaign. Do you like it?" The question surprised her. She looked at the photographs, cool-toned, architectural, beautiful in a detached sort of way. "No," she said before she could stop herself. "Then, I think it's well executed. I just don't think it feels like the store. It feels like it belongs in a gallery. People come here to imagine themselves in the clothes, and that," she gestured at the wall, "makes them feel like spectators instead." The suited man made a sound. Tara couldn't tell if it was agreement or alarm. Colton Reid looked at the wall for a long moment. "I thought the same thing," he said. "But no one has said that out loud until now." Tara didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing. "The baseboard by the fitting rooms needs attention," he said, shifting back to something more businesslike. "There's a gap in the paneling. It's a small thing, but in a store at this price point, small things matter." "I'll report it today," Tara said. "Good." He looked around the floor one more time. "Thank you, Miss Flynn." He started to turn away, and something, she would never be entirely sure what, made Tara say, "I gave you the coffee shop recommendation this morning. The one 2 doors down." He turned back. Something shifted in his expression, something that was almost a real smile this time, almost. "I didn't go," he said. "I had coffee in my car." "Smarter," she said. He looked at her for one more moment, and then he and the suited man walked toward the back of the store, toward the corridor that led to the offices. Tara stood very still in the middle of the floor until they disappeared through the door. Then she turned back to the sales floor, straightened a scarf on a nearby display that didn't need straightening, and told herself that her heart rate would return to normal in a minute. It took closer to 5. She was restocking the glove wall at 4:30 when Britt came to find her again, eyes wide in a way that suggested significant news. "He wants to talk to you," Britt said. "Who?" "Don't who me," Colton Reid. "His assistant just called down and said he'd like a few minutes with you before he leaves." Tara set down the pair of gloves she was holding. She thought about asking what it was about, and then decided that was a question she could only answer by going to find out. The store had a small conference room on the 2nd floor that was mostly used for buyer meetings, and once, an intervention about dress code. Colton Reid was already there when Tara arrived, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee from somewhere that was not 2 doors down, his jacket finally off and draped over the back of the chair. He looked marginally less like a lakefront wanderer and marginally more like what he apparently was. There was a second cup of coffee on the table, waiting. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Tara sat. "I'm not here to address what happened this morning in any official capacity," he said. "I want to be clear about that. You handled it well. I'm actually here because I try to visit the retail locations every year without announcing it first. Because I've found that announced visits tell me very little about how things actually operate." "I see," Tara said. She thought about her morning, the turtleneck display, the regional manager's comment about intentionality, the way she'd crossed the floor to apologize to a man in a frayed jacket. She wondered what the day might have looked like if she'd known she was being observed, and immediately felt relieved that she hadn't. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, the same way you answered about the photographs." "Okay, what would you change about this store if you could?" The question settled into the room like something that had been waiting to be asked. Tara thought of 100 professional, appropriate, diplomatically worded answers. She thought of the comment about intentionality, and the way she'd nodded through it while disagreeing with about 70% of what was said. She thought about 3 years of knowing exactly what was wrong with various things, and saying so only to Britt or to the walls of her apartment. Then she thought about what she'd said about the photographs and the fact that he'd said no one has said that out loud until now. "The fitting rooms," she said. "The lighting in there is the most unflattering possible for the price point. People try on a $1,200 coat and they look at themselves under lights that make everyone look vaguely ill. And then they hesitate, and they leave without buying, and they go home and order online from somewhere they can return for free. The fitting room is where a sale is won or lost, and ours lose more than they should." He was quiet for a moment. "What else?" "The commission structure creates competition between associates that doesn't serve the customer. People are protective of their clients in ways that make the floor feel territorial. If the structure rewarded team outcomes instead of individual ones, the whole floor would work better. That's a significant operational change." "You asked what I'd change, not what would be easy." There was a pause and then he laughed. Actually laughed. A real one, not polished or performed, just a sound that came out because something had genuinely surprised him. It changed his face completely. It made him look younger and less armored and like someone she might have been less cautious around from the beginning. "Fair enough," he said. They talked for another 40 minutes. She wasn't sure how that happened. She'd gone in expecting 10, but it happened. He asked about the regional management structure, and she answered carefully but honestly. He asked about customer feedback patterns, and she told him what she actually heard from people, not the sanitized version that made its way into surveys. She asked him at some point why he visited stores in ordinary clothes instead of announcing himself. "Because announced visits are performances," he said. "Everyone performs. And I've been performing for people my whole career, and I've gotten very tired of it." She thought about the frayed jeans and the worn-out sneakers, and the way he'd stood in the center of the floor looking up at the ceiling like he was trying to understand something, and she thought she maybe understood that better than he knew. When she stood to leave, he said, "One more question." She waited. "Why did you come over and apologize?" Most people wouldn't have. She thought about it. "Because I said something I'd say differently if I could, and I don't like leaving things like that. Especially things I can actually fix." He nodded slowly, like he was putting something away somewhere careful. "Good night, Miss Flynn," he said. "Good night, Mr. Reid," she said, and she left. The following Thursday, Tara arrived at the store to find an email from the facilities team, saying that the fitting room lighting was scheduled for replacement at the end of the month. A note at the bottom said the request had been flagged by corporate. She read it twice. Then she went to the cashmere wall and started folding, and she didn't say anything to Britt about it, or to anyone. 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon when the store was quiet and the early November cold had pushed everyone indoors, and the fitting rooms were lit with their new warm-toned bulbs that made everyone look like the best version of themselves, Colton Reid walked through the door again. This time he was wearing a slightly better jacket. The jeans still had the frayed hem. Tara was at the register. She looked up. He looked at the fitting room area, noted the new fixtures with something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one, and then he walked over to the register. "The lights look good," he said. "They do," she agreed. "I've been thinking about the commission structure. So have I. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts. There's a coffee place 2 doors down, apparently." Tara looked at him for a moment. He looked back. Something in the room was quieter and more concentrated than it had been 30 seconds ago. "The coffee there is actually terrible," she said. "I only sent you there because I hadn't had mine yet and I was irritable." He stared at her. Then that laugh came out again, the same real one, catching him slightly off guard, the same way it had before. "There's a good place on Erie Street," she said, "if you have time." He picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on the counter. "I have time," he said. She told Britt she was taking her break. Britt looked at Tara, then at Colton Reid, then back at Tara, and said absolutely nothing, which was the most restrained she had been in 3 years of knowing each other, and Tara would thank her for it later. They walked out onto Michigan Avenue into the cold, and Tara pointed left, and they started walking, and he asked her something about the regional structure again. But the way he asked it was different from before, less like a man with a clipboard, and more like someone who was curious, genuinely, about what she thought. And she answered him the same way she'd been answering him all along, the only way she really knew how to answer anything, which was directly and without performing, because that was the part of herself she'd always refused to negotiate with. The coffee on Erie Street was very good. She didn't know, standing there in the gray November cold with the steam rising from her cup, that in 4 months she would be standing in a meeting room at Reed, Capital, giving a formal presentation on retail engagement strategy to 12 people she'd never met. With Colton Reid sitting at the end of the table watching her with that expression she'd gotten somewhat better at reading. She didn't know that the presentation would run long because she kept getting interrupted with questions and that nobody seemed to mind. She didn't know that afterward he would hold the elevator and say, very quietly, that she was the most honest person he had encountered in 5 years of running the company, and that he had started to find that her words, her specific and unfew-actured way of seeing things, somewhat difficult to stop thinking about. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew, standing on Erie Street in November, was that the coffee was good, and the conversation was better, and that the man beside her had come back into the store 3 times now, and the 3rd time had nothing to do with business, and both of them knew it, and neither of them had said so yet. And somehow that was exactly right.